You know, I just finished prepping a bunch of this 556 and 223 brass. And what I do is, of course, I first of all wipe these things down so I'm not putting any grit into my dies. And then I lube these cases, and while that lube is drying just a little bit, I'll go ahead and check for a case head fracture. We've got videos on detecting that. I'll make sure to post that in the description below. And I'll check for overall case length, trim as necessary, check the case head expansion, all those sorts of things. And then the next set of steps, after I wipe these back down to get that lube back off, I'll go over to the RCBS case prep station, and I'll be working on two parts of these cases. Number one, I'll be working on the head, and then I'm working on the mouth. Well, the point of this video, or the focus of this video, is really on the head of these cases, and principally on the primer pockets. You know, I've never run into this sort of problem with other cases or cartridges, save for the 223 and the 556. And that is that if this primer pocket is not prepared correctly, you'll oftentimes have problems seating a new primer into this case. Now, a lot of these cases might have a crimp on the primer, and that crimp needs to be removed. Now, you can remove the primer, you can decap the old primer, but that will not remove a crimp that's on that primer. It'll just force it out. But if you don't take care of a crimp on this case head, you're going to experience problems seating a new primer. And they'll likely, number one, be very difficult to seat, and number two, if you do get them seated, they're going to really flatten out and not going to give you good performance. In fact, it may not fire at all. And I'm not even so sure if it's always just the fact that there's a crimp in place around that primer area. I think that sometimes some of this brass, especially on some of that blasting ammo type brass, the primer pocket itself may not be very uniform, and we can spend a lot of time on that case prep station and still experience problems seating a new primer. So I've experienced that a fair amount, and what I ended up doing is purchasing a Dillon Precision Super Swage 600. I'm going to show you how that works here in just a little bit. But if we go over to the case prep station, the first station that I work with is where I use a brush on the primer pockets. And this tool that I'm specifically using is from Mick J Tools, and I'll put a link to that little tool in the description as well. I actually purchased this through Amazon, and it works very, very well. The RCBS brush that comes with this case prep station works fine initially, works pretty darn well, but the brushes themselves always get bent out of shape. I don't care how careful you are with it, but over time you're going to need to replace those. Something like this McJ Tools I think is going to last a lifetime, and as you see, it does a fine job of cleaning up those primer pockets. Then I'm going to move in a counterclockwise fashion to the RCBS Military Crimp Remover tool. This works pretty well, but as I alluded to earlier, it doesn't work perfectly. And then the third station is the RCBS Primer Pocket Uniforming tool. The remaining two tools on this case prep station are a deburring tool and chamfering tool. These particular tools that I'm using on this RCBS case prep station are actually Hornady tools. And I prefer these because they simply seem to work a little bit better than what the RCBS ones did. But the next step with this 556 or 223 brass is a mandatory step in my mind, and it has eliminated the problems I talked about earlier, and that is the use of this Dillon Precision Super Swage 600 tool. Pretty simple tool. A little bit of adjustment needs to be made when you first get this thing. Nothing too difficult. You can simply follow the instructions that are supplied with the tool. I then mounted it on a little chunk of this particle board here. I don't load 556 exclusively, so I don't need this taking up bench space all the time. So what I do is I'll end up clamping it to my bench whenever I need it. Pretty simple operation, really. Lift this post, place the case on the post, drop it into position, and then you'll see I have these witness marks put in or added to the tool itself, to the Super Swage. And then what you'll want to do is you need to lower the ram all the way down. Okay, not just here, but all the way down to effect a correct swage. So what I do is I mount it to the edge of my bench, and that works out really well. Now, if you do not position this in the correct position, which is why I added these witness marks, it allows me to get this, all this, in the perfect position. If you don't, number one, you're going to feel it. You're going to feel quite a bit of pressure or resistance when you're trying to move this ram. If you don't stop there, you're going to gouge the case head, and that's not a place where you want to do damage. So if you do that, I'm just going to chuck the case. Just feel this thing as you're using it, and there's really nothing too much to it. Now you might say, well, I don't use any of that military surplus or mil-spec brass, or I don't use any of that ammo, factory ammo. Well, it's not just mil-spec or mil-surplus ammo that has a crimp on it. Case in point is this Norma USA. Clearly has a crimp on that primer, and you gotta get rid of it. So rather than case sort every single piece of brass that you might have and studying it to determine if it has a crimp on that primer pocket area, just swage it. That takes care of everything. It uniforms the primer pocket as well, and seating primers in to make a brand new load out of it is so simple, so effortless after that. It's well worth a little bit of extra time, a little bit of an investment. Thanks for watching.